day away from Sean Diddy Combs learning his fate after his federal sex crimes convictions. The rapper faces up to 20 years behind bars for his two convictions. He was acquitted of a third charge. He could have landed him, though, behind bars for the rest of his life. Now, just last week, a judge issued a 16-page opinion denying the music mogul's request for an acquittal or a new trial, writing that the federal government proved its case many times, presenting overwhelming evidence from impactful testimony by victims and escorts, along with texts and emails. Tomorrow, Combs' legal team will point to his behavior during his time in jail, offering a 6-week course called Free Game with Diddy, adding he considers it, quote, one of the most impactful and important endeavors of his life. So I'd like to welcome in Neama Rahmani, a former federal prosecutor and the president of Los Angeles West Coast Lawyers. Neama, great to see you again. So 2 counts on which he was found guilty, a maximum penalty of 10 years each. The prosecution is asking for no less than 135 months imprisonment. The defense, though, is calling for a sentence of no more than 14 months, since he's already served a year. That would allow him to essentially walk free by the end of this year. So we have 14 months versus 135 months. What all is the judge considering here, Neama?
Nicole, the judge is going to consider the sentencing guidelines in this case. And like you said, the prosecution is recommending 11 years. The defense is essentially recommending time served. You get a 15% reduction if you're a good inmate in federal prison. So the fact that he's already served 13 months, he'd be out in a matter of days if the judge goes with the defense recommendation. And then you have U.S. probation, which is an independent arm of the court. They're recommending 5 to 7 years. So obviously, these recommendations are all over the place. So tomorrow, the judge is going to hear from the victims. So folks like Cassie, Jane, Mia, they're going to have their chance to speak. Combs may well speak as well. Seems like his lawyers say he might. And of course, the lawyers are going to make their arguments, the prosecution and the defense. And the judge is going to have to decide where along that range he ends up. He could go time served. He can do 11 years. He can do more than that, up to 20 years, or somewhere in between.
All right, so I want to zoom in on something you just said there. So although we know he did not testify at his trial, as you said, his defense team has indicated that Sean Combs does intend to address the court tomorrow at his sentencing. Are you surprised by this, Neama? Is this a good idea? And what do you think he will say?
I am very surprised because I expect Combs to be sentenced to prison time and to appeal. And we know he's going to appeal not just the sentence, but the conviction. Now, the judge denied the motion for a new trial, but the defense is making some creative arguments with respect to the prostitution counts. The first is that because Combs himself didn't participate in the sex acts, that he just watched, it was more voyeurism, he can't be held liable for prostitution. And I think that argument was rightfully rejected by the judge, because even if you facilitate it, that's enough, even if you don't participate in the sex acts. And the other is even more creative. Because Combs filmed many of these sex acts, he's arguing that this was just homemade pornography and that it was art, and he can't be held liable as a result. That argument was also rejected, but I think the defense wants to preserve those arguments. Why is that important? If Combs were to testify tomorrow and accept responsibility and admit what he did, that would certainly help and be mitigation at sentencing, but it could potentially hurt him on appeal if he's admitting these allegations and essentially waiving a lot of these defenses. So he has to be very careful what he says. I think he's going to want to try to walk a fine line to express some remorse, but not enough where he loses the opportunity to pursue these appeals.
Yeah, oh, that's a really interesting twist there, Neama. Okay, so we know that one of his lawyers has acknowledged that people close to Sean Combs have approached the Trump administration to request a pardon. Now, based on what we have seen from President Trump, and he does have somewhat of a track record of pardoning rappers, do you think this is a real possibility?
Nicole, I think it's a very real possibility. And President Trump has handed out federal pardons like Halloween candy. It's coming up next month. So I wouldn't be surprised if the president decides to pardon or even commute Diddy's sentence, especially because he was acquitted of the most serious counts of racketeering and sex trafficking. I think Combs will get time, but there is a very good argument here that he was just convicted of simple prostitution, and no one is prosecuted for simple prostitution by the feds. And if they are, they certainly don't get more than a year in federal prison. So there's certainly an argument that he is being treated unfairly. Obviously, the fact that he was prosecuted by Maureen Comey, who was terminated, the daughter of James Comey, adds a whole political layer on top of this. So I think a presidential pardon is very possible, maybe even likely in this case.
Interesting. All right. So we know that the legal drama is not over. It doesn't just end with this, because just a week ago, there was a new lawsuit filed by an ex stylist, which is alleging assault and battery against Sean Combs. So, how does that factor, if it does at all, into this overall picture for Sean Combs?
Well, Combs certainly isn't out of the legal woods yet. And obviously, he's beaten the most serious charges. I do expect him to get some time, maybe not 11 years, but years in prison. But now, all these civil lawsuits, and I believe there's more than 60 now that have been filed, they were stayed or put on hold while the criminal case is pending. So Combs could absolutely still be held civilly liable. Obviously, everyone knows the classic example of O.J. Simpson, found not guilty in the criminal case, then found civilly liable and had to pay a large judgment in the wrongful death lawsuit. It's a lower standard in civil court. You don't have to prove the case by uh, reasonable doubt, beyond a reasonable doubt. It's just the preponderance of the evidence. So that's just slightly more likely than not. In many states, you don't even need a unanimous jury. And I think the cases will be presented very differently because we're not talking about exes, girlfriends, former employees. Many of these civil lawsuits were filed by individuals who really didn't stay in the relationship with Sean Diddy Combs. And I understand the psychology of abuse and why victims may stay, but I think that was one of the biggest problems the prosecution had here. They really couldn't answer the question of why did these women stay if they were abused? And I think the jurors thought maybe they enjoyed the lifestyle and they really knew what they were getting themselves into with these freak offs.
Well, we will certainly see what happens tomorrow as sentencing. Former federal prosecutor Neama Rahmani, thank you, as always.
Thanks, Nicole. Talk soon.